Jessica Camilleri, a woman from Sydney, Australia, decapitated her mother in a tragic incident on the night of July 20th, 2019. Having faced humiliation at school due to her apparent cognitive delays and learning difficulties, Jessica retreated into resentment. She developed aggressive behaviors when feeling threatened or when she thought she was being mistreated, which could range from a stranger's glance to her mother's refusal to give her extra food. Her paranoia grew, fueled by an obsession with horror movies like the 1974 Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This film, known for its intense violence, was banned in several countries, including Australia and the UK. It's about a group of young people in Texas being chased by chainsaw-wielding cannibals. On that fateful Saturday night, Jessica used 7 kitchen knives to stab her mother in the skull, decapitate her, and then threw her head into a neighbor's yard. After the act, she shockingly asked the police if a doctor could sew her mother's head back on to bring her back to life. Jessica Camilleri was the second daughter of Rita and Vince, an Australian Maltese couple. Unlike her older sister Christy, Jessica was born with a mental disability. While the average person's IQ ranges between 90 and 110, Jessica's was between 55 and 60, placing her in the bottom 1% and categorizing her mental delay as mild. People with mild intellectual disability often learn to speak, read, write, and do math later than others, but they can still communicate and express themselves in daily life. Jessica was late in reaching developmental milestones like walking, talking, and coordinating movements. Due to her condition, she was enrolled in school much later than her peers, facing early on the discomfort, teasing, and bullying from classmates for being different. Jessica dealt with the resulting stress and anxiety through anger, particularly towards females, and developed intermittent explosive disorder. This condition is marked by sudden, repeated outbursts of impulsive, aggressive, and violent behavior, as well as angry verbal eruptions that are grossly out of proportion to the situation. Intermittent explosive disorder usually appears by the age of 6 and intensifies during adolescence and early adulthood. It's not just a normal tantrum, but a mental disorder linked to a lack of serotonin, the mood-regulating hormone in the brain. At school, Jessica lashed out at students and teachers alike, once biting a male student and refusing to let go, leading to her indefinite suspension and confinement at home under her mother Rita's care, supported by a disability pension. Besides intellectual disability and irrational bursts of fury, Jessica also suffered from attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, a chronic brain condition that affects millions of children worldwide and makes it hard to control her behavior. She was also diagnosed with severe bipolar disorder, depression, and anxiety. Furthermore, Jessica had autism spectrum disorders, affecting her judgment, awareness of thoughts, feelings, and empathy towards others. Autism made simple daily activities like shopping, using public transport, banking, and working difficult for her. Jessica had obsessions, such as with her 3 favorite numbers, 2, 3, and 5, which she associated with her favorite colors, yellow, green, and purple, respectively. She liked to repeat these numbers to create random phone numbers to dial, often trying to talk to men. Once, she called a family's home in Bangladesh, India, up to 100 times a day, just because she liked their phone number. In 2018, she began harassing the staff of a meat company in Daylesford, England, even threatening the company owner Matthew Layfield's family, claiming she would decapitate them with a chainsaw. Jessica's fascination with horror movies was another unchecked obsession. She spent hours, days, months, and years rewatching gruesome videos, especially fixated on films like Saw, Jeepers Creepers, and her favorite, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974, about young people in Texas chased by chainsaw-wielding cannibals. This movie was banned in several countries, including Australia and the UK, for its violence. When her mother Rita restricted her from these films, Jessica would become furious with her. Jessica and her mother Rita lived alone in a house in St. Clair, a suburb of Sydney in New South Wales, Australia. Vince, Jessica's father, divorced Rita during Jessica's teenage years because of the continuous behavioral problems of their daughter. The marriage couldn't withstand Jessica's outbursts, leading to its downfall. Despite Jessica's low self-esteem and her childish and naive personality, she exhibited strong narcissistic traits. Deep down, she believed she was unique and deserved special treatment because of her mental disability, which sometimes made her exploitative and egocentric. Rita, however, was unwavering in her care. She knew her daughter had issues but felt it was her duty to look after and protect her. Rita even reached out to apologize to one of the victims of Jessica's harassing phone calls, admitting she was at her wits' end and unsure how to control her daughter. Although Jessica loved her family, she was especially close to her mother, who catered to all her needs and chose to keep her at home instead of placing her in a psychiatric facility for full-time care. Rita's life revolved around Jessica. According to the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, 1 in 5 Australians, or 20% of the population, approximately 4.8 million people, reported having a mental or behavioral condition between July 2017 and June 2018. Women reported a higher proportion of mental or behavioral conditions than men, and young people aged 15 to 24 had the highest proportion of mental or behavioral conditions. Mental illness refers to a clinically diagnosable disorder that affects a person's cognitive, emotional, or social abilities. It encompasses a range of conditions, including depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and psychotic disorders. These conditions significantly impact an individual's emotions and how they interact with their community, affecting not only the individuals themselves but also their families and caregivers. The tragic event of July 20th, 2019 was not an isolated incident. 6 years before the calamity struck the Camilleri family, Jessica had been convicted on a couple of occasions for common assaults causing actual bodily harm. She had also previously attacked an aunt and her sister's mother-in-law by pulling their hair. However, she was never jailed. Instead, she was always left in the care of the one person who could tolerate her, her mother, Rita. Jessica had also been aggressive towards women in the streets and shopping centers who she perceived as looking at her wrongly or making her feel ashamed. She was once barred from a doctor's office after becoming paranoid and violent towards another patient in the waiting room. In early 2018, during a visit to the hospital with Rita, Jessica attacked a nurse. Jessica was admitted to a mental health unit for 9 days due to a severe mood disorder episode and was treated with lithium for supposed bipolar disorder, along with antipsychotic medications. By the end of 2018, about 6 months before the crime, Jessica had stopped taking her medication and started using natural remedies to manage her conditions. Rita was so desperate that she paid $2,500 to a medium on Queen Street in St. Mary's, a western suburb of Sydney, hoping to exorcise the demon she believed was inside Jessica. Rita's family and friends repeatedly warned her about the dangers of living with Jessica, but Rita insisted her daughter wouldn't harm a fly. Christy, Jessica's older sister, described their mother Rita as having a heart of gold, always putting others before herself, including Jessica, who repeatedly refused professional help. Rita's sister also recognized Rita's unconditional love for Jessica and often expressed concern that Jessica might harm her. However, Rita's motherly love blinded her to these warnings, ignoring them even the day before the fatal attack when she had to take Jessica to a police station because her daughter had made threatening calls to strangers again. On July 20th, 2019, Jessica felt humiliated by her mother in front of a man who merely walked past them in a parking lot. After visiting her sister, the two women returned home. Jessica asked her mother to order another round of food from Red Rooster, but Rita refused. Jessica then called the restaurant herself 3 times at 9:18, 9:20, and finally at 9:21 p.m. Jessica also asked her mother to call a doctor to come to their house. Rita complied, but the doctor fled the home, terrified by Jessica's behavior, which chased him until he managed to escape in his car. Rita, out of patience and options, told Jessica she would call the emergency number and request an ambulance to take her immediately to the mental health care system. Jessica's worst episode of rage was about to unfold. That night of July 20th, 2019, 57-year-old Rita was dragged by her hair to the kitchen of her own home by Jessica. Using 7 meat cleavers, 4 of which broke, Jessica stabbed her mother over 100 times in the head and neck. This act of mutilation was driven by more than uncontrollable anger. It reflected Jessica's macabre curiosity, influenced by her obsession with the horror films she watched daily. The forensic pathologist's autopsy revealed that Rita had suffered monumental injuries to her head and neck and died from multiple stab wounds with decapitation at the second vertebra in her upper neck. Rita's body also had over 90 defensive wounds, indicating she was conscious for a significant part of the attack, experiencing extreme physical pain and emotional terror from what her daughter, whom she had devotedly cared for, was doing. During this gruesome scene, Jessica's nephew, the 4-year-old son of her older sister Christy, was present. He had been under Rita's care for a few days due to Jessica's seeming improvement. The boy witnessed Jessica stabbing his grandmother multiple times and decapitating her. When he tried to intervene, Jessica, whom he called the little bastard, slightly injured him in the head. The young boy started vomiting upon witnessing the horrific scene. After killing her mother, Jessica called the emergency number from Rita's cell phone and confessed to murdering her mother, claiming self-defense, alleging that Rita had attacked her first. Then, Jessica felt she had to act fast and began repeatedly stabbing her mother. After decapitating and stabbing her mother over 100 times, Jessica dumped the head in a nearby neighbor's front yard. When the police arrived at the house in St. Clair, Sydney, New South Wales, Jessica was outside, her clothes stained with Rita's blood, holding a water bottle. She showed no remorse for her actions, only worrying about what would happen to her next. Jessica asked the police officers and later the detectives at the crime scene if it was possible to bring someone back to life who had been decapitated, believing in the possibility of medical miracles that could reattach her mother's head. A police officer responded that this idea was rather unrealistic. Yet Jessica insisted, thinking that doctors could perform miraculous surgeries and reattach her mother's head. She also inquired if she would face any consequences, like the death penalty, for killing her mother. When told that Australia does not have capital punishment, Jessica felt relieved. She also confessed to the police that the idea of decapitating her mother came from the horror movies she watched compulsively. This chilling conversation was recorded on the body camera of a police officer when he arrived at the scene at 11:43 p.m. on July 20th, 2019. First responders described the scene as one of the most horrific they had ever encountered. The day after the crime, on July 21, 2019, Jessica appeared at the court but did not apply for bail. A friend told the media that this was not surprising, as Jessica likely did not understand what bail meant. After a trial highlighting her long history of mental illness, Jessica was found guilty of manslaughter in December 2020, having pleaded not guilty to murder due to disability. In early 2021, she was sentenced to a maximum of 21 years and 7 months in prison, with a non-parole period of 16 years and 2 months, making her eligible for parole on September 19, 2035. The prosecutor told the court that Rita's gruesome murder was the peak of a lifetime of escalating violence from Jessica, progressing from hair-pulling to a deadly explosive attack. He also argued that Jessica was assessed as a moderate to high risk of reoffending and remained a continuous danger to the community. Christy, Jessica's older sister, stated that Jessica had killed and butchered their mother and that she could never forgive her for her actions. Rita's sister hoped that Jessica would receive the necessary help and that Rita could rest in peace, knowing Jessica was cared for by a system that had failed her in life. The case judge offered counseling services to the jury members, acknowledging that the distressing evidence they had heard could stay with them long after the trial. The judge acknowledged that during the jury selection process, many individuals refused to participate in a trial like Jessica's. She also stated that Rita's murder was one of the most severe cases of homicide a court could encounter. She described it as a crime of extraordinary cruelty and brutality, exacerbated by its occurrence in the victim's own home. Jessica's lawyer mentioned that his client had expressed remorse in a letter sent to her family after the crime. In the letter, Jessica admitted that Rita had not hit her and acknowledged that it was her fault that her mother was no longer alive. However, one of the psychiatrists who evaluated her noted that Jessica did not use social gestures to communicate and displayed a rather mild lack of emotion on her face. The psychiatrist also found no signs of schizophrenia or auditory or visual hallucinations in Jessica. The conclusion reached was that Jessica's risk factors could only be managed over the long term with a comprehensive mental health support plan. Jessica was placed in the most stringent unit of the women's section at the correctional complex. Since entering prison, Jessica has continued to cause trouble. On September 9, 2019, just 2 months after her arrival, she threw a teacup at another inmate following a disagreement over food trading. The next day, she was charged with assault at the local court but received no additional punishment. On October 14, 2019, she attacked another inmate, resulting in 5 days of solitary confinement in her cell. On November 3, 2019, she disobeyed an order, and on July 31, 2020, she damaged property, incurring a fine of $200 Australian. Another assault on November 21, 2020, led to 7 days in solitary, and in January 2021, she was convicted of common assault again without any further sanction. Jessica has defended her actions, stating that no matter what she does or where she goes, other prisoners will make her life miserable. She also mentioned that prison life is tough and not like the outside world. Mental health issues are prevalent among prisoners. According to the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, 40% of Australian prisoners had a diagnosed mental illness in 2018. Furthermore, statistics show that 1 in 5 people with mental illnesses will interact with the criminal justice system at some point in their lives. While there is no direct causal link between having a mental health condition and committing a crime, these figures indicate that many individuals in Australian prisons had pre-existing mental health conditions. Research shows that people with mental illnesses are more likely to commit crimes, particularly those with psychotic disorders, as such episodes can lead to criminal behavior. Symptoms of bipolar disorder can be directly related to criminal acts, and extreme anxiety or stress can increase the likelihood of violent behavior due to heightened anger, agitation, or impulsivity. However, there's another side to this. The prison environment can worsen pre-existing mental health conditions, with violence and brutality from other inmates or prison staff potentially triggering or exacerbating mental health issues. According to the Australia Policy Development Centre, a prison is a dreadful place for someone with a mental illness. In Sydney Supreme Court on May 15, 2023, Justice Peter Hamill dismissed claims that Camilleri's sentence was manifestly excessive and that the sentencing judge had been incorrect in assessing the gravity of the crime. Justice Hamill nonetheless ruled that Camilleri should be resentenced, with support from Justices Christine Adamson and Richard Kavanaugh. He considered that her behavior of walking into the street with her mother's head and dropping it, as well as asking emergency services personnel whether they could reattach it, demonstrated the extent to which her conduct was divorced from the real world. Based on the evidence of multiple psychiatrists and a psychologist, Justice Hamill found Camilleri had only a simple understanding of moral wrongfulness due to her intellectual disability and autism spectrum disorder. He ordered that she be resentenced to a prison term of 16 years with a non-parole period of 12 years. And so, dear viewers, this concludes today's episode of Unreal True Crime. Please remember to subscribe and like if you appreciate my work. Good night, and I'll see you in the next crime story. Good afternoon, dear audience. As you know, here at Unreal True Crime, we release videos every other day. Many of you have reached out, expressing a desire for daily content, so we've launched a new channel also focused on real-life crime stories called The Crime Storyteller. On the days we don't post videos on Unreal True Crime, we'll upload them there. This means if you're looking for daily doses of the most astonishing real-life crime cases, don't hesitate to subscribe. Without further ado, let's dive into today's case. In the mid-1990s in Spain, two young Romani teenagers, Rosa and Marcelino Vega, defied societal expectations by getting married before reaching legal adulthood. For them and their community, navigating life was already a complex affair. The Romani people, officially termed by the European Union, have been part of Europe for nearly a millennium. As it stands, they are Europe's most significant ethnic minority, numbering between 8 and 10 million. Despite their population size, the Romani continue to face severe challenges, from school segregation and forced relocations to being marginalized into ghettos. They also struggle with restricted employment prospects solely based on their heritage and limited access to healthcare and other essential public services. So far, no resolution from the European Union's governing bodies has managed to effectively address these issues. Yet, despite facing all these adversities, Rosa and Marcelino fell in love and chose to build a life together. Adding another layer of uniqueness to their story, especially from a Western perspective, is the fact that they were cousins. Immaculata had a unique dual relationship with Rosa, being both her aunt and mother-in-law, as well as the matriarch to the 4 other children. In the Romani community from which they hailed, There was a strong focus on keeping unions within the family to preserve their cultural heritage and lineage. Such unions were prioritized over relationships with non-Romani individuals, often referred to as payos. At the tender age of 15, Rosa and Marcelino embarked on the journey of family life. Their first son, Adolfo, arrived swiftly and was marked by his quintessential Romani features, dark skin and jet black hair. His grandmother affectionately dubbed him Diablo Moreno, or a dark-skinned devil. Shortly thereafter, Jonathan was born. Unlike his brother, he had lighter skin, which made him appear more like a payo. His blue eyes were as luminous as sunlight dancing on the sea, and his unruly blonde locks earned him the lifelong nickname Chucky, reminiscent of the messy-haired doll from the notorious 90s horror movie. The young family shared a humble abode with Immaculata, a small two-room wooden house lacking doors, situated in the Romani community of Las Castellanas in Madrid. This settlement was predominantly composed of extended family members who relied on collective support to navigate their persistent financial struggles. The Vega family, Marcelino's lineage, was an established Romani clan. They had transitioned from agricultural labor to scavenging and selling an assortment of inexpensive goods, from garlic to brass, in a bid to make ends meet. Amid this backdrop of hardship, Rosa and Marcelino received news that they were expecting a third child when Jonathan was still an infant. Their joy, however, was tragically short-lived. On the fateful morning of August 7, 1998, Marcelino, then only 19 years old, died tragically. He was riding in the back seat of a car that crashed at a speed of 200 km per hour on a highway near Barcelona, Spain. Shortly after the tragic loss of Marcelino, Rosa gave birth to a daughter whom she named Carmen. Unfortunately, Marcelino was no longer around to hold her in his arms, leaving Rosa as another young Romani mother facing the challenges of raising her children alone. This was the reality for many impoverished Romani families. They neither controlled lucrative antique markets nor were involved in large drug trafficking operations. Along the way, they had also lost the traditional skill of basket weaving, which once provided extra income. Long gone were the days of field work. They had moved to the city to scrape a living from scavenging. Despite these challenges, they aimed to remain united and uphold the traditions that made them feel at home, no matter where they were. Life moved on for Rosa and her children. Fast forward to Saturday, May 27, 2000, past 2 p.m. in the Romani community of Las Castellanas in San Fernando de Henares, Marcelino's birthday was being commemorated. He would have turned 21 that day had he not died in a car accident 2 years prior. As per Romani custom, the birthdays of the deceased are remembered. To mark the occasion, many in the community visited the cemetery to lay flowers and pay their respects. In Romani culture, the life of a departed loved one is celebrated as well as the life that could have been, no matter how short. On that day, children were running around and playing after having finished their meals. The adults were split between various tasks. Some were scavenging for scrap metal to sell, others were resting after lunch, and some had gone to the cemetery for Marcelino's birthday. Among the group of children, all of whom were cousins, was little Jonathan, the middle child of the late Marcelino and Rosa. By that time, he was already 2 years and 8 months old. Jonathan was an energetic and spirited little boy. On that particular day, his 17-year-old Aunt Isabel was looking after him. She took him and a few of his young cousins to a nearby shopping mall called Prica for an outing. They strolled around for a while, enjoying some sweets before opting to capture the moment in a photo booth. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when Isabel, upon collecting the booth's photographs, discovered that Jonathan was missing. In a state of alarm, she combed through the Prica Mall, repeatedly entering and exiting, all the while shouting Jonathan's name. Seeing no trace of him, she raced back to their community to rally the family. By the evening, after formally reporting his disappearance to the police, national authorities joined the search efforts, with firefighters getting involved the following morning. Realizing the gravity of the missing child situation, no one took the matter lightly. Even tracking dogs were deployed, but they yielded no clues regarding Jonathan's whereabouts. Officials soon dismissed the idea that Jonathan had simply wandered off and gotten stuck in nearby natural areas or construction debris. Specifically, the under-construction M45 highway, located not far from their settlement, was examined but ruled out as a location where Jonathan might have been. The next day, both print and TV news featured the unsettling story of a Romani child kidnapped in broad daylight from a mall. The news stunned and worried the public, highlighting the urgency and seriousness of the situation. The community and authorities continued their search, hoping for any lead that could bring Jonathan back to his family. In reaction, both Rosa's and Marcelino's families invoked their deep-rooted communal bonds, managing to gather over 200 Romani individuals from various cities like Sevilla, Malaga, Barcelona, Oviedo, and Madrid. Day and night they combed the areas around Madrid. Although financial resources were limited, they created and posted makeshift flyers at gas stations in the vicinity, but all efforts were in vain. As hours turned into days, desperation escalated. Investigators revisited Prica, the scene of Jonathan's disappearance, and reviewed the available security footage, which unfortunately did not offer any insights due to its outdated technology. A woman who claimed to have been at the mall on that fateful Saturday reported seeing a tall, dark man giving a child, who resembled Jonathan, a bag of sweets before leading him to a children's ride. She later saw them at a cafe, where the man had a beer before departing with the child. However, her account could not be verified. The chief investigator assured everyone that they were treating the case as a high priority and even initiated an international alert via Interpol. Accompanying Jonathan's picture, they provided his description: blue eyes, blonde hair, approximately 3.3 feet tall, around 55 pounds, with milk teeth, dressed in a blue one-piece suit. With no stone left unturned, his family blanketed Madrid with posters featuring Jonathan's image and a contact number. Unfortunately, the numerous calls received were not all sincere or helpful. Numerous theories were considered, yet none provided answers. The concept of abduction became increasingly likely both within the family and from a law enforcement standpoint. One avenue explored was a potential clash between different Romani families. Authorities questioned countless individuals, and the regional government representative at the time, Francisco Xavier Anzurtegui, consulted with heads of Romani families in Madrid. All claimed ignorance about the young boy's disappearance, insisting he wasn't in the hands of any clan. Financial motives were also scrutinized. The family revealed they were awaiting a large insurance payment of 25 million pesetas, approximately $139,000 following Marcelino's death, making it conceivable that someone aimed to claim the money. The family was plagued by anomalous phone calls from a hoarse-voiced man, asserting he had Jonathan, yet no demands were made. While police pursued this lead, it yielded no results. Disturbingly, other calls came in featuring the sounds of a child crying, heightening the family's anguish. These calls were later traced back to a psychologically unstable woman who used a doll to simulate the cries. As days passed with no ransom request, the likelihood of a kidnapping for financial reasons waned. After 2 torturous weeks, Jonathan's location remained a mystery. During this period, the non-stop ringing of the household phone escalated their emotional turmoil. Calls came from inquisitive journalists or individuals offering moral support, but no concrete help. Jonathan remained headline news, yet this offered no advantage in finding him. Immaculata, a grandmother of 38, epitomized the challenges faced by the poor Romani community, enduring the heartache of the situation while striving to keep her family's spirits alive in the face of such adversity. Prematurely aged by years of hardship and now further diminished by grief, she nonetheless endeavored to support her niece, Rosa, a young widow with a child missing. Amidst this devastating situation, Rosa attempted to nurse her 15-month-old daughter, Carmen, who was too young to comprehend the tragedy unfolding around her. Rosa was eating poorly and seemed to be withering away from the inside. A report from the newspaper El País depicted their community, Las Castellanas, as a mud-filled hamlet dotted with makeshift dwellings. Home to 50 to 60 families and encircled by emaciated, unresponsive dogs, the settlement presented a bleak picture of life on the margins. In the summer of 2000, Rosa received the insurance settlement for Marcelino's untimely death. Although it brought some financial respite, the 14 million pesetas were less than they initially expected. Committed to finding her missing son, Rosa designated 7 million pesetas as a reward for information that could lead to Jonathan. She spent the remaining money on a van and countless flyers featuring Jonathan's image. Rosa also purchased additional phones to handle potential leads and, accompanied by relatives, began a relentless journey. They traveled throughout Spain and even crossed into France and Portugal in the hopes of locating Jonathan. Regrettably, the search only deepened their sense of loss and despair. At just 21 years old, Rosa pledged to continue the search for her son, even if it meant walking the entire country with only a cane to aid her. As days stretched into months, a grueling 6 months had passed when Rosa's hope for a family reunion was brutally dashed. One evening, while watching television, they heard a breaking news report. A truck driver had stumbled upon skeletal remains not far, about 1.5 kilometers away, from the shopping center where Jonathan had last been seen. Given the closeness, it was feared that the remains could be Jonathan's. The news stunned the tight-knit Romani community and extinguished any lingering hope that the boy would be found alive. Interestingly, the media stated that this particular area had supposedly been scoured in the initial frantic searches for Jonathan. The bones were located near the construction site of Madrid's M45 highway. The truck driver had stopped to assess the site before unloading soil from the construction project. When he saw the small skull, he immediately thought of Jonathan and reported his discovery, even as the soil was being dumped at that location. The police acted swiftly, using heavy machinery to unearth a fractured skull and a few ribs with no obvious marks of violence. Nearby, they discovered children's clothing, a blue overall, a shirt, and a pair of shoes, all faded but intact. Rosa and Jonathan's grandmother identified these garments as the clothes Jonathan was wearing when he disappeared. To the family, it became clear what had tragically occurred. The authorities advised them to wait for conclusive DNA test results for final verification. A week later, the family received confirmation that the discovered remains were indeed Jonathan's. Rosa, his mother, was so overwhelmed by the news that she had to be hospitalized and treated for acute anxiety. The confirmation brought a tragic closure to the long search, leaving the family to grapple with the painful reality of their loss and the need to seek justice for Jonathan. The emotional toll of searching for her son for 6 months culminated in the heartbreaking discovery of his remains. Debate arose about whether the area where the remains were found had been adequately searched earlier. The local security official claimed that this particular stretch had been overlooked because it was beyond the expected radius of where Jonathan might be found. This discrepancy led to differing opinions among the community and authorities. Some thought the remains had been there all along, while others suspected they had been moved recently. A regular forager and the landowner of the area both stated they hadn't noticed anything unusual. Police refrained from speculating how the fragmented skull, lower jaw, and ribs ended up near the construction site. However, the regional governor suggested that the remains might have been brought there by the truck dumping soil for the construction. The family held fast to their belief that Jonathan was criminally taken, asserting that he would never have wandered off by himself. They clarified, however, that they didn't suspect anyone in particular, noting that if they had, they would have enacted their own form of justice in keeping with the Romani code of an eye for an eye. Clarity remained elusive in the case, and forensic analysis of the remains could not ascertain the cause of Jonathan's death. He was laid to rest in a modest white coffin beside his father, in a funeral attended by just over 20 people, all grappling with the unresolved tragedy. Through it all, Rosa was visibly shattered, unable to stop her tears and suffering from multiple collapses. Although the case remains open, police have made no significant progress. To this day, the circumstances surrounding Jonathan's death remain a mystery, lacking both justice and explanation. That is the end of today's story. Thank you for your continued support. If you enjoy this content, please consider subscribing, giving it a thumbs up, and sharing. Your support enables me to keep creating. See you soon in another unreal true crime. It was just past 1 in the morning on May 14, 1983, in Orange County, California. Officer Sterling and Sergeant Jaguar were on duty on the San Diego freeway when they spotted a brown Toyota Celica driving really weirdly. They went to pull the car over, and that's when they met him face to face. They didn't know it yet, but they were looking at the most wanted killer of the last 10 years. The man stood there, spilling beer on the ground and with his pants undone. He agreed to take a breathalyzer test, which he obviously failed. As they were about to arrest him for drunk driving, they felt something wasn't right, like they were missing something big. Sergeant Jaguar checked the car and found something that would haunt him forever. A young guy in the passenger seat, lifeless. This was the scene that the killer hadn't recorded in his secret list, which had more than 67 victims on it, victims who had faced unimaginable horrors. Randy Kraft was born on March 19, 1945, in Long Beach, California. He was the fourth kid and only the son of Opal Lee and Harold Herbert Kraft. Kraft's father had moved to California from Wyoming weeks after the American entry into World War II. Upon finding employment as a production operative at Douglas Aircraft Company, he was joined by his wife and 3 daughters. The Kraft family lived modestly, and Kraft's mother took several jobs to supplement her husband's assembly line salary. Kraft's mother took several jobs to supplement her husband's assembly line salary. Kraft's mother initially found employment as a seamstress in a Westminster garment factory before later obtaining employment as a cook in a local school. Nonetheless, Opal Kraft always found time for her children. In 1948, the Krafts moved to Westminster, Orange County. Kraft attended Midway City Elementary School, where his mother was a member of the PTA. As a student, his intelligence was noted by classmates and teachers. By 1957, Kraft was judged intelligent enough to attend accelerated classes at 17th Street Junior High School. After finishing high school in 1963, he went to Claremont Men's College in the small town of Claremont. Randy was into a lot of things there. He joined the Reserve Officers Training Corps and got really into politics. In 1964, he even supported the Vietnam War publicly and helped campaign for Barry Goldwater, the Republican presidential candidate. Randy also worked at a local gay bar and was so busy that he started taking Valium to help with his stomach and headaches. However, over time, his friends got worried about how much medicine he was using. His grades started to drop. He began drinking, played poker all night, and even failed his econometrics class, which delayed his graduation by 8 months. 1968 was a big year for Randy. He got his economics degree and shifted his political views from right-wing to more democratic, even working hard for Robert Kennedy. That same year, he joined the U.S. Air Force, aced the tests, and showed he was really smart with an IQ of 129. He got sent to Edwards Air Force Base in Kern County, California, a place with high security. But in 1969, Randy's life changed dramatically when he told his family and friends he was gay. They accepted him, but the military didn't, and he was forced to leave. Feeling down, Randy went back to bartending and later became a truck driver in Huntington Beach. He also started teaching courses at California State University, Long Beach. There, he met Jeff Graves, a younger guy from Minnesota. They started dating, and it looked like Randy was getting his life back on track. But he had a dark secret. In March 1970, while wandering around Huntington Beach, Randy met 13-year-old Joseph Alvin Fancher, who had run away from home. Randy invited him to live together, which seemed nice, but he had evil intentions. After bringing Joseph to his apartment, Randy drugged and attacked him. Joseph managed to escape while Randy was at work, and a passerby saw Joseph's bad state and called for help. Joseph was taken to the hospital, where he told the police about being drugged and beaten by Randy, but he didn't mention the abuse. The police went to Randy's apartment without a warrant, and fearing for their jobs, they decided not to press charges, leaving Randy free to offend again. By the end of 1971, the police found an unidentified, decomposed body on Ortega Highway. The victim was Wayne Joseph Duquette, a 30-year-old bartender. The autopsy indicated he died from alcohol poisoning on September 20th of that year. The investigation stalled, with no leads on Wayne's clothes, belongings, or his killer. On December 26, 1972, police on Highway 405 in Seal Beach found 20-year-old sailor Edward Daniel Moore's body. He was tied at the wrists and ankles, had a hit mark on his face, probably from a blunt instrument, bite marks, and shockingly, a sock stuffed in his rectum. It looked like he'd been thrown from a moving vehicle. 6 weeks later, on February 6th, police found a man's body, aged between 17 and 25, near the Terminal Island Freeway. He couldn't be identified, but like Edward Moore, he had a sock stuffed similarly. Police suspected the same killer was behind these crimes, but the culprit remained at large as more victims appeared. On April 9th, 17-year-old Kevin Clark Bailey was found beside a road in Huntington Beach. He had been castrated and sodomized. 13 days later, another dismembered body was found and given the name John Doe. On July 30th, 20-year-old Ronnie Jean Wiebe was found strangled, with marks suggesting he'd been restrained and hung before death. The year ended with another gruesome discovery on December 29th. 23-year-old art student Vincent Cruz Mestas was found dead in the San Bernardino Mountains. He was openly bisexual. As with several previous victims, One of the victim's socks had been forced into his rectum. Mestas's hands had been severed from his body and were never found. By November 1974, 5 more victims had been found beside or close to major roadways in Southern California, 3 of whom had been conclusively linked to the same killer. 2 of these victims, 20-year-old Malcolm Eugene Little and 19-year-old James Dale Reeves, had each been found beside a freeway with foreign objects inserted into their bodies, whereas the body of the 3rd victim, 18-year-old Marine Roger Edward Dickerson, bore evidence of bite marks much like several earlier victims. On January 3, 1975, Kraft abducted and murdered a 17-year-old high school student named John Liras. The youth was last seen boarding a bus in Long Beach. His strangled body was found the following day, discarded at Sunset Beach with a foreign object protruding from his anus. Drag marks along the beach close to where his body was found suggested that 2 individuals had carried Laras's body into the water. 2 weeks after this murder, on January 17th, the body of a 21-year-old named Craig Jonadis was found discarded in the parking lot of the Golden Sails Hotel near the Pacific Coast Highway and Loynes Drive in Long Beach. Jonadis had been strangled to death with a length of string, possibly a shoelace. By January 1975, a total of 14 victims, whose bodies had been found discarded across 4 separate counties over the previous 3 years, had been linked to the same killer. All the victims had been Caucasian males with similar physical characteristics. On March 29, 1975, Keith Crotwell and his friend Kent May left home to hitchhike south, unaware of the fate awaiting them. Kraft lured the 2 men from a Long Beach parking lot into his Ford Mustang. The youths were given beer and Valium as Kraft drove in a random, aimless manner around Belmont Shore and Seal Beach. The police started searching right away, and soon they got a tip from 2 young people. They said they saw Crotwell and May in a black and white Mustang speeding into a parking lot. The driver quickly leaned over, opened the passenger door, and pushed May out onto the ground. He was almost out of it, probably from drinking or drugs. They saw Crotwell slumped over the driver's shoulder before the car sped off into the night. A month later, they found Crotwell's head at a pier near Long Beach Harbor. The police scoured the city for clues to find the driver. They eventually got a name, Randy Kraft. On May 19th, he was questioned. He admitted picking up Crotwell but claimed he left him at a cafe and knew nothing more. He also said his car later crashed and he had to call a tow truck. Jeff, still his partner, backed up his story. The detectives didn't believe him, but the Los Angeles County prosecutors wouldn't charge him due to the lack of evidence and because they couldn't find the rest of Crotwell's body or determine how he died. So, Jeff was free again. After a cool-down period, his crime spree just got worse. On December 31st, he kidnapped 22-year-old Mark Hall, tied him to a tree in a canyon, abused him, cut off his private parts, stuffed them into his rectum, burned him with a lighter on the chest, nose, and cheeks, gouged out his eyes, and then attacked him with a broken bottle. As if that wasn't horrific enough, Kraft suffocated Mark by stuffing leaves and dirt into his throat. When the police found Mark's body, they were shocked, and the autopsy revealed he was alive for much of this ordeal. This led the police to profile the killer as highly intelligent, methodical, and organized, possibly with military background, noting the use of surgical tape on several victims' noses, a technique used in the military to prevent body decomposition after death. On January 24, 1976, investigators from different parts of Southern California gathered in Orange County to discuss how to proceed with the search. Meanwhile, Kraft was living a peaceful life. In the following months, he ended things with Jeff Graves, and soon found new love in Jeff Seelig, a 19-year-old baker's apprentice. They moved to Laguna Hills, promised each other forever, and shared a passion for threesomes, often picking up people from highways for this. During this time, Kraft wasn't violent, and it seemed his relationship had quenched his thirst for blood. He went nearly a year without committing any crimes until he struck again on December 10th, killing 19-year-old Paul Joseph Fuchs. Though Fuchs's body was never found, his name was on Kraft's list of victims. Kraft lay low after that, but on April 16, 1978, he strangled Scott Michael Hughes after drugging him with Valium and removed one of his testicles. Hughes's body was found fully clothed except for his shoelaces. On June 11th, 23-year-old Roland Gerald Young was found near a San Diego highway, mutilated and stabbed, then thrown from a speeding vehicle. 8 days later, the body of Marine Richard Allen Keith was found in Moulton Parkway, showing signs of being tied up, with strangulation as the cause of death and alcohol in his system. Despite ongoing efforts, police couldn't pin down the killer or save the victims, including Keith Arthur Klingbeil, a 23-year-old found beside Interstate 5, strangled with his shoelaces. At the hospital, they discovered he had ingested large amounts of paracetamol and alcohol and had burn marks on his chest. He died shortly after. On September 29th, Richard Anthony Crosby, 20, was found dead under similar circumstances along Highway 71 in San Bernardino, having vanished the day before while hitchhiking. The California Strangler, as the media dubbed him, had the region in fear, with every officer on alert for the next crime. On November 12, 1978, trucker Michael Joseph Inderbeaton's body was found near the San Diego freeway, castrated like the others. In addition to having been castrated, Inderbeaton had been violated with a foreign object and had suffered burns similar to those inflicted on victim Mark Hall 2 years previously. The cause of death was listed as suffocation. Kraft's attacks became less frequent, with the next one occurring in July 1979 on a highway. Donnie Harold Crissell, a 20-year-old sailor, died from acute alcohol poisoning, with signs of being tied and tortured. 2 months later, parts of 21-year-old British tourist Keith Anthony Jackson were found in trash bags behind a Union 76 gas station in Long Beach. A sock was found inserted in his rectum. Only Jackson's head, torso, and left leg were ever found. 2 weeks later, on September 14th, the body of 19-year-old Gregory Wallace Jolly was found in Lake Arrowhead. Jolly had been emasculated, and his head and legs had been severed after death. His possessions were later found in Kraft's home. On February 18, 1980, 19-year-old Mark Allen Marsh's body was dumped near Templin Highway, last seen hitchhiking to Buena Park. That summer, Kraft's job took him to Oregon, where he stayed in Portland and claimed 2 more victims. Michael Sean O'Fallon, a recent college graduate hitchhiking across the country, fell prey to Kraft, who drugged and strangled him, his body found near Salem. The following day, Kraft is believed to have killed a man estimated to be aged between 35 and 45 years old, whose body was found beside a freeway in the city of Woodburn. Kraft forced him to swallow a toxic level of Valium and paracetamol before strangling him with a cord. In September, Kraft returned to California and resumed his crimes, this time involving Robert Loggins, with whom he took incriminating photos. These photographs, which were subsequently found in Kraft's possession, show Loggins in Kraft's living room slumped fully clothed on his sofa, apparently intoxicated, and in various nude, pornographic postures. All these pictures depict Loggins with his eyes closed. It is unknown whether the victim was alive or dead when they were taken. On April 10, 1981, he kidnapped Michael Cluck while hitchhiking, brutally killing him with 31 blows to the head after assaulting him, and dumped his body near Interstate 5 in Oregon. 4 months later, the partially clothed body of male prostitute Christopher Allen Williams was discovered in the San Bernardino Mountains. He had ingested several drugs, and a paper towel stuffed in his nostrils caused him to choke on his own mucus. By early 1982, the relationship between Kraft and Selig had become marred by frequent fights and episodes of temporary separation. In an effort to resolve their personal differences, the couple began attending weekly counseling sessions in Huntington Beach. These sessions began on June 22, 1982. Then, the brutality of the killings escalated. Raymond Davis, just 14, disappeared while looking for his dog in Echo Park. 12 days later, he was found decomposed under leaves, wrists tied and shoelace around his neck. Nearby, 16-year-old Robert Avila was found dead under similar circumstances. He had been strangled to death with a length of stereo speaker wire. Kraft is not known to have killed again until November 1, 1982, when he abducted and murdered a 24-year-old Modesto man named Arna Michael Lane. Lane was last seen hitchhiking towards Orange County in search of work. His body was not found until January 1984, discarded on a hillside close to the town of Ramona. 4 weeks after Lane's murder, the semi-nude body of 26-year-old Brian Witcher was dumped from a moving vehicle alongside the Interstate 5 freeway, close to the city of Wilsonville, Oregon. Witcher had ingested high levels of both alcohol and Valium, but he died of asphyxiation. On December 3, 1982, 29-year-old Anthony Jose Silveira vanished while hitchhiking. 2 weeks later, his body was found, showing the same signs as previous victims. After this murder, Randy left on business, returning with Silveira's military jacket, ready for more victims. Before returning, he stopped in Michigan, staying at the Grand Rapids Hotel where he met Dennis Alt and Christopher Schoenborn. He drugged and assaulted them, then murdered Dennis by suffocation and Christopher by strangling him with a belt after inserting a pen into Christopher's urethra. Their bodies were found on December 9, 1982, in a field near the hotel. Kraft left Schoenborn's keys and Silveira's jacket in his room before fleeing. That month in Portland, he killed 19-year-old Lance Taggs by overdosing him with drugs and suffocating him with a sock in his windpipe. His body was discovered the following day, discarded alongside a rural road in Clackamas County, close to where the body of Witcher had been found just 2 weeks earlier. Eric Church, 21, last seen hitchhiking from Orange County to Sacramento, was found dead along Interstate 605, suffering similar tortures to Dennis and Christopher, but with signs of struggling against his restraints. He died from strangulation and severe head injuries. On February 12, 1983, Kraft killed 2 Buena Park men, 18-year-old Jeffrey Nelson and 20-year-old Roger Duvall. The 2 young men were last seen outside the house of a friend named Bryce Wilson shortly after midnight when they told Wilson they intended to purchase something to eat. Kraft continued these heinous acts, unaware that his luck was about to change dramatically. It was 1:10 a.m. on May 14, 1983, when Officer Sterling and Sergeant Howard spotted a brown Toyota Celica driving erratically on the San Diego freeway in Orange County. They pulled it over, and out stepped Randy Kraft, casually tossing a beer bottle onto the pavement. Officer Sterling noticed Kraft's pants were undone, which was really odd. He had Kraft do some sobriety tests, which he clearly failed, so they arrested him for drunk driving. Meanwhile, Sergeant Howard approached the Celica and observed a young man slumped with his eyes closed in the vehicle's passenger seat, partially covered by a jacket. Several empty Moosehead beer bottles and an open prescription bottle of lorazepam tablets were strewn around his feet. Howard attempted to wake the man. Receiving no response, Howard attempted to rouse the man by shaking his arm, only to note the individual had a low body temperature. Upon checking for a pulse, Howard noted the man was dead, with a ligature mark visible around his neck. Lifting the jacket from the victim's lap, Howard noted the victim's jeans had been opened to expose his genitalia. In addition, the victim's hands had been bound with a shoelace, and his wrists bore evidence of welt marks. Later identified as Terry Lee Gambrell, a 25-year-old Marine stationed at El Toro Air Base, the victim had been strangled to death. Searching the car, Howard also found lots of damning evidence: alcohol, tranquilizers, various prescriptions, and an envelope with over 47 eerie photos showing young men in explicit, lifeless poses. Plus, there was blood on the passenger seat, but it wasn't Grambl's since he had no open wounds. Howard had a hunch they had caught the California Strangler. They took Kraft to the sheriff's department and searched his house, finding clothes and belongings of many young men whose bodies had been found over the years, along with more photos of unconscious or dead men. But the most shocking find was Kraft's coded list of 61 victims, including 4 double murders, totaling 65 young men. Gramble was not on the list since his death led to Kraft's arrest. After matching the list with discovered bodies, the count reached 67, clearly indicating Kraft needed to face the harshest penalty. The California Strangler was charged with 15 murders between December 1972 and May 1983, after over 700 witnesses were interviewed and more than 250 pieces of evidence were presented. The trial began on September 26, 1988, where Kraft pleaded not guilty but was convicted and sentenced to death on November 29, 1989. Following a moratorium in California, his sentence was changed to life without parole. While his capture brought peace to the region, it left an unresolved question. Did he have an accomplice? Some details of Kraft's crime suggested he might not have acted alone. On one hand, forensic evidence in 2 cases revealed an extra set of fingerprints and DNA that didn't match the California Strangler. On the other, it seemed unlikely that Kraft could have moved bodies weighing up to 200 pounds alone, and it was even more suspicious that he kept them in his car for long periods without anyone noticing. Moreover, the photos Kraft had of the murdered men had to be developed somewhere over the years, yet no photo lab ever reported these images to the police. Initially, it was thought Kraft might have developed them himself, but he lacked a darkroom and the necessary skills. Suspicion fell on Jeff Graves, Kraft's ex-partner, but he died before the police could question him, leaving the mystery unsolved. However, a breakthrough seemed to come years later when Bob Jackson claimed to have the answers. After Dennis McDougal published his book Angel of Darkness about the California Strangler in 1991, Jackson contacted him, confessing to killing 2 hitchhikers with Kraft, one in Wyoming in 1975 and another in Colorado in 1976. However, authorities in both states said they couldn't verify these claims. Jackson insisted he knew more about Kraft, claiming Kraft's list only included the most memorable murders and that the real number of victims was closer to 100. McDougal reported this to the police and provided interview recordings. The detectives questioned Jackson but didn't believe him. No murder charges were filed against him, and he was eventually persuaded to check into a psychiatric hospital. Jackson gained some notoriety when his claims were published in a Beach magazine article in January 2000. Meanwhile, Kraft sued McDougal and the Angel of Darkness publisher, claiming the book tarnished his reputation, portrayed him as sick and insane, and hindered his future job prospects, demanding $62 million in damages. The lawsuit was dismissed as frivolous in June 1994, ending the fabrications of the California Strangler. Kraft is still in prison. Despite most of the bodies being found, 22 remain unlocated. The California Strangler shows no interest in aiding the investigation or expressing remorse for his actions. His sadistic crimes are as shocking as his ability to evade capture for a decade, instilling terror and leaving a bloody stain across California. That's the end of today's episode of Unreal True Crime. We've dived deep into the shadows of humanity's darkest deeds, but remember, the truth is often stranger and more chilling than fiction. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a beat in our exploration of the most bewildering criminal cases. Until next time, this is Unreal True Crime.